Move your filthy cows, you disgusting redneck trash. Karen Halloway screamed this as her white BMW X5 barreled toward my pregnant heifers. She thought, because she drove a white BMW X5 and ran the HOA for the new subdivision next door, she owned my land. She was about to learn that in Texas, the deed is king. I spent $52,000 on concrete just to watch her life fall apart. And honestly, it was worth every penny. My family's ranch, the Riverside Ranch, isn't some gentleman's hobby farm. It's 50 acres of prime Texas soil, bought and paid for with the blood and sweat of my grandfather back in 1940. He cleared this land with a mule and a prayer, pulling stumps out of the black earth until his hands were raw meat. My father took it over after him, and he taught me every contour of this place, every dip in the pasture, every stubborn rock that refused to move. He taught me the smell of the air before a storm and the particular lowing a cow makes when she's about to calve. The deed to this land, a brittle piece of paper kept in a fireproof safe, wasn't just a legal document, it was a testament. It was our history, our legacy, our soul written in soil and ink. The gravel road that cut through the north corner of our property, the one that led from the old county blacktop to the back pasture, was on that deed. It was ours. Period. For 80 years, that road was just a dusty track used for moving cattle and equipment. It was quiet. The only traffic was my Ford F-250, the hay baler, and the occasional curious deer. Then came the bulldozers. On the far side of the county road, a developer bought up a 100-acre plot of what used to be Old Man Weatherby's fallow fields. They called it Willow Creek Estates, a name that was a lie from the start since the only creek for miles was the one that ran through my property. They put up a fancy sign with swirling letters and a picture of a smiling, soulless family that looked like they'd never seen a speck of dirt in their lives. The construction was a year-long headache. The constant beeping of trucks in reverse, the whine of saws, the dust that coated everything in a fine red film. My wife, Sarah, a high school science teacher, with the patience of a saint, just sighed and wiped it off the windowsills every evening. "Progress, Jake," she'd say, though her tone said she didn't believe it any more than I did. I could live with the dust. I could live with the noise. What I couldn't live with was her. Karen Halloway. She was the president, founder, and apparently the sole deity of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. She was also the lead real estate agent, a fact I learned from the giant smiling photo of her on the for sale signs. She had that particular brand of brittle blonde hair that looked like it would snap if you touched it, and a smile that never, ever reached her cold, calculating eyes. The first time I met her, I was mending a fence line that bordered her precious estates. She pulled up in that gleaming white BMW, the tires crunching on my gravel like it was an personal insult to them. She rolled down her window, the electronic whirring an alien sound out here. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of fake sweetness that sets your teeth on edge. "I'm Karen Halloway, with Willow Creek." She said it like she was announcing the arrival of the Queen of England. I just nodded, pulling the wire taut with my pliers. "Jake Mercer," I said, not offering a hand because it was covered in grease and dirt. She looked at my hand and her lip curled just a fraction of an inch before the plastic smile snapped back into place. "Mr. Mercer," she cooed, "we are just so thrilled to be your new neighbors. We're building a community of distinction here." I grunted. "Just keep your distinction on your side of the fence, ma'am, and we'll get along fine." Her smile tightened. "Of course, it's just this road." She gestured with a perfectly manicured hand at the gravel track I was standing beside. "It provides such convenient access from the main road to the back of our development. It's going to be a wonderful little shortcut for our residents." I stopped my work and stood up straight, slowly taking off my hat and wiping the sweat from my brow. I looked at her, then at the road, then back at her. "Ma'am, this isn't a shortcut. This is my private driveway. It's on my property. It's for moving my cows." Her face went through a flicker of emotions. Annoyance, disbelief, then back to condescending patience. "Oh, you adorable man," she chuckled, a sound like grinding glass. "I think you'll find it's a community easement. It's on all the promotional maps. A lovely little perk for our buyers. That was the first red flag, a big, flapping, crimson banner. "There's no easement on this road," I said, my voice flat and low. "Never has been. This road begins on my property and ends on my property. The only person who uses it is me." She waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, we can have our lawyers sort out the silly little details. Bless your heart for being so protective of it. Anyway, you have a wonderful day." She rolled up her window and sped off, kicking up a plume of dust that settled all over my clean laundry hanging on the line. I stood there for a long time, the fence pliers heavy in my hand, and I had a feeling, a deep, gut-level certainty, that this was only the beginning. A few weeks later, the first houses were finished and the moving vans started rolling in, and just as I'd feared, the traffic on my road started to pick up. Not a lot at first. A minivan here, a sedan there. They'd drive slow, looking around like they were at a safari park. I'd be out in the pasture and they'd stop and take pictures of the cattle. I'm a patient man. My father used to say I had the patience of a fence post. So I put up a sign, a nice, professionally made sign. It said, in big, clear letters, "Private property, Riverside Ranch, no trespassing." I hammered it into the ground right where my road met the county blacktop. I figured that was clear enough for anyone. The very next day, I found the sign pulled out of the ground and tossed into the ditch. I put it back up, this time sinking the post in a bag of concrete. The day after that, someone had spray-painted HOA access over the words "private property." My patience was starting to fray. The final straw of that first phase came a week later. I was moving a herd of about 30 heifers, half of them pregnant, from the south pasture to the north one, using the gravel road just as my family had for 80 years. It's a slow process. You don't rush a pregnant cow. You let them take their time. We were about halfway up the road when I heard it. The high-pitched whine of an engine moving way too fast. It was her, Karen Halloway, in her white BMW, coming down the road like she was qualifying for the Indy 500. She saw the herd and didn't slow down. Instead, she laid on the horn. A long, blaring, infuriating sound that shattered the afternoon peace. Cattle are creatures of instinct. A sudden, loud noise like that, a predator-like machine bearing down on them, it's pure panic. The herd scattered. They bolted, eyes wide with terror. Pregnant heifers, heavy and clumsy, stumbled and fell. They crashed through the barbed wire fence I'd just spent a week mending, tearing their hides. It was chaos. A stampede of Black Angus running blindly from a woman in a luxury SUV. I sprinted, waving my arms, yelling, trying to get ahead of them and turn the herd before they hurt themselves worse. It took me the better part of an hour to calm them down and get them rounded up. One of them, a beautiful heifer named Sweet Caroline, one of my prize breeder's daughters, was limping badly. Another was bleeding from a deep gash on her flank from the fence wire. All of them were spooked, their breathing ragged. And Karen? She had just sat there in her car, tapping her fingers on the steering wheel. When I finally got the road clear, I walked up to her window, my face a mask of cold fury. I was shaking. Not from the exertion, but from a rage so pure it felt like ice in my veins. She rolled down the window, a smug look on her face. "Took you long enough," she snapped. "I have an appointment." I planted my hands on her car door, leaning down so my face was level with hers. I could smell her expensive perfume, a cloying floral scent that made me want to gag. "You ever," I said, my voice barely a whisper but harder than any shout, "ever do that again, and you'll regret it for the rest of your life. This is not your road. These are not your filthy cows. This is my ranch, my livelihood, and you just endangered it for your own damn convenience. This is your first and your last warning." For the first time, the plastic smile vanished, and I saw the real Karen Halloway. Her face twisted into a snarl of pure, unadulterated entitlement. "How dare you threaten me, you hick? This is a community right-of-way. I will have my lawyers sue you into the Stone Age. You can't stop progress." She shrieked. "Watch me," I said. I stood up, turned my back on her, and walked away. I didn't look back as she peeled out, spraying gravel all the way down the road. I had to call the vet out for Sweet Caroline. A torn ligament. She'd probably always have that limp. The other heifer needed stitches. The vet bill was over $1,000. That night, as I sat at the kitchen table looking at the bill, Sarah put her hand on my shoulder. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I looked out the window at the darkness at the land my grandfather had tamed. "I'm going to finish it," I said. The polite warnings were over. The war had begun. The first step was simple, direct, and in my mind, non-negotiable. The next morning, I drove into town and went to the farm supply co-op. I didn't mess around with some dinky little chain and padlock. I bought the heaviest duty gate they sold. It was 16 feet of galvanized steel tubing, thick as my arm, with a cross-bracing pattern designed to stop a charging bull. It weighed close to 400 pounds. I also bought a case-hardened steel lock with a shielded shackle, the kind they use on shipping containers, and a length of logging chain that looked like it belonged on a battleship's anchor. The whole setup cost me nearly $800, but I considered it an investment in my sanity. It took me the rest of the day to install it. I had to auger out 2 deep holes, one on each side of the road, and set a pair of 8-inch diameter steel posts in 2,000 pounds of concrete. I wanted this thing to be a permanent feature of the landscape. As the sun set, I hung the gate. The clang of it closing, the solid, final thud as the latch dropped into place, was one of the most satisfying sounds I'd ever heard. I wrapped the chain around the gate and the post, snapped the big lock shut, and stood back to admire my work. It was beautiful. A simple, elegant, and very, very clear statement. You shall not pass. For 2 glorious days, there was peace. The silence was profound. No more minivans on safari. No more sedans kicking up dust. Just the hum of insects and the lowing of my cattle. It was the quiet I'd grown up with. The quiet I'd taken for granted. On the 3rd morning, I drove down to the gate to head into town for supplies, and I saw it. The lock was gone. The chain was lying in the dirt, not cut with bolt cutters, but with a high-powered angle grinder. The clean, scorched metal of the severed link gleamed in the morning sun. The gate was swung wide open. A fresh set of tire tracks, the distinctive tread of a BMW SUV, were pressed into the gravel, heading toward the estates. The ice in my veins returned, colder this time. This wasn't just trespassing anymore. This was willful destruction of property. This was a declaration of war. I didn't bother closing the gate. I drove straight into town, but not to the co-op. I went to a specialty hardware store and bought 2 more locks, identical to the first, and a new length of chain. Then I went to the electronics store and bought a trail camera, a high-definition, motion-activated one with night vision. I drove back home, resecured the gate with the new chain and one of the new locks, and then I concealed the camera in the thick branches of an old oak tree that overlooked the entire scene. The very next afternoon, the camera sent a notification to my phone. I tapped the screen and watched the live feed. There she was, Karen Halloway, dressed in yoga pants and a designer top, looking utterly out of place against the backdrop of my pasture. She had a battery-powered angle grinder in her hands. Sparks flew as she cut through the brand-new chain. She tossed the severed links aside, removed my lock, and casually tossed it into the ditch. Then she got back in her car, drove through, and didn't even bother to close the gate behind her. I saved the video, time-stamped and crystal clear. Evidence item number 1. I went out, replaced the chain and the lock again, and waited. This went on for a week. Every day, she'd cut the chain. Every day, I'd replace it. Every day, I'd save a new video file to a folder on my computer labeled Halloway. It was a stupid, expensive, and infuriating routine. I was out over $100 in chains and locks, but I knew I was building a case. The polite conversations were a distant memory. The time for simple physical barriers was proving to be a temporary solution at best. This woman was not just entitled. She was pathologically stubborn. She truly believed her desire for a shortcut superseded my property rights, the law, and common decency. She believed she could grind her way through any obstacle I put in her path. She was about to find out that my resources and my resolve were deeper than she could possibly imagine. The paper war was about to begin. The first shot from her side came via a man in a rumpled suit who drove a beat-up sedan. He found me out by the barn, shoeing a horse. "Jake Mercer?" he asked, holding out a thick envelope. I knew what it was before I even took it. A process server. Inside was a lawsuit filed by the Willow Creek Estates HOA, which was to say, by Karen Halloway. It was a masterpiece of legal fiction. It claimed the existence of a prescriptive easement, arguing that because the road had been open and accessible, they now had a legal right to use it. It accused me of maliciously blocking a community thoroughfare and causing emotional distress and financial hardship to the residents. It demanded I remove the gate permanently and pay them damages. I almost laughed. Sarah was less amused. She read through the document that night, her brow furrowed with worry. "Jake, this could get expensive. Lawyers aren't cheap." I tapped the papers. "It's all lies, Sarah. There's no easement. Never has been. She's bluffing." "Bluffs can still cost a fortune to call," she said quietly. She was right, but I wasn't about to fold. The next morning, I took a day off from the ranch work, a day I couldn't really afford to lose, and drove to the county seat. The county clerk's office was in the old stone courthouse, a building that smelled of dust, old paper, and floor wax. I spent the next 6 hours in their records room, a place where the sunlight struggled to get through the grimy windows. I pulled the plat maps for my property, going back to the original survey from 1939 before my granddad even closed the deal. I unrolled the massive, brittle sheets of linen paper on a long wooden table, and there it was, in the elegant, spidery handwriting of a long-dead surveyor, my 50 acres clearly delineated, and the road, drawn with a ruler in India ink, labeled explicitly, private farm track, 50 feet width, sole use of property owner. There was no mention of an easement, no dotted line indicating a right-of-way, nothing. I then pulled the deed itself, and every deed transfer since, from the original seller to my grandfather, from my grandfather to my father, from my father to me. Each one was ironclad. The language was unambiguous. I paid the clerk to make certified copies of everything, the plat map, the deeds, the original survey notes. Holding that stack of papers, I felt a surge of righteous power. This wasn't just my opinion. This was the recorded, legal truth. Her lawsuit was built on a foundation of pure fantasy. Just as I was starting to feel like I had the upper hand, she escalated. The following Monday, a shiny pickup truck from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality rolled up my driveway. A young man in a polo shirt and steel-toed boots got out holding a clipboard. "Mr. Mercer, we received an anonymous complaint," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Allegations of illegal dumping of hazardous waste, specifically cow manure, contaminating the local watershed." I stared at him. "The watershed? You mean my creek? And the hazardous waste? You mean cow patties?" He had the decency to look embarrassed. "Yes, sir. I have to conduct an inspection." So I spent the next 2 hours walking this poor kid around my ranch. I showed him my manure management system, which is basically a compost pile that I later used to fertilize my own hayfields, a closed-loop system as old as farming itself. I showed him the creek, which ran clear and clean, bordered by thick vegetation that acted as a natural filter. I showed him my cattle, who were happily munching on grass, blissfully unaware that their digestive processes had become the subject of a state-level investigation. The agent took some water samples, made some notes, and finally shook his head. "Mr. Mercer, your operation is cleaner than 90% of the ranches I visit. This is a textbook example of responsible land management. I'm sorry to have wasted your time. This complaint is baseless." He didn't have to say who filed it. We both knew. 2 days later, it was a sheriff's deputy. This time, the anonymous complaint was about animal cruelty. That one cut deep. I love my animals. They're my life. The deputy, a guy named Miller who I'd known since he was a kid in 4-H, looked even more uncomfortable than the EPA agent. "Jake, I know this is garbage, but I gotta look. The call came in, I gotta respond." We walked through the herd. He saw their clean water troughs, the ample pasture, their healthy coats. He saw Sweet Caroline's limp, and I showed him the vet bill and explained what happened. He just shook his head, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "This is harassment, Jake. Pure and simple. You know, you can file a report of your own for her cutting your locks. Destruction of property is a crime." I told him I was keeping a record. "Good," he said. "Keep a good one." The phone calls and useless inspections were one thing. The next step was a public declaration of war. She called the local news. I was in the middle of lunch when I saw the Channel 8 news van pull up, stopping just short of my gate. Karen was there waiting for them. She had somehow managed to produce tears. She stood in front of my gate, pointing at it like it was the Berlin Wall. A reporter, with a microphone and an earnest expression, listened as Karen spun her tale of woe. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I could imagine. She was the beleaguered community builder, the champion of families. I was the crusty, mean old rancher, the monster who was denying innocent children a safe place to ride their bikes. The reporter, a young woman who looked like this was her first big scoop, eventually walked over to my side of the gate. "Sir, can we get your side of the story?" she yelled. I walked down the drive, holding the certified copies of my deeds and maps. "My side is pretty simple," I said calmly. "This is private property. It's legally and historically mine. Here's the proof." I held up the papers. The cameraman zoomed in on them for a second, but I knew how this would go. That night, we watched the 6 o'clock news. There was Karen, crying about the danger of children having to use the main county road. "All we're asking for is a little bit of neighborly compassion," she sobbed. "But Mr. Mercer has chosen to build a wall of hate." Then they cut to me. They showed a tight shot of my face, looking angry, and a blurry, unreadable shot of the papers in my hand. They edited my statement down to just, "This is private property." They made me look like an unreasonable, angry old man, a redneck villain. My phone started ringing. People I knew from town, calling to see what was going on. Some were supportive, but others had seen the report and were buying her story. "Can't you just let them use it, Jake? What's the harm?" one of them asked. The harm was the principle. The harm was the $1,000 vet bill. The harm was the constant grinding disrespect for my land, my family's legacy. But how do you explain that to someone who just saw a woman crying on television? The final piece of the puzzle, the one that turned my simmering rage into a cold, hard plan, came from the most unlikely of sources. Eddie, our mailman. Eddie had been delivering mail on this route for 30 years. He was a fixture, a man who knew everyone's business, not because he was a gossip, but because he was observant. He found me by the mailbox the next morning, a stack of letters in his hand. He looked around, then leaned in close. "Jake," he whispered, his voice conspiratorial, "you need to know what she's doing." He handed me one of the promotional flyers for Willow Creek Estates that he was supposed to deliver. It was glossy, full of pictures of happy families and sprawling houses. He pointed to a bulleted list of community amenities. Right there between resort-style pool and community clubhouse, it was listed, "Exclusive private ranch road access." My blood ran cold. "She's not just telling them they can use it," Eddie whispered. "She's selling it. It's in the sales contracts." I overheard her on her porch, talking to a new couple. She's guaranteeing them access in writing. Calls it a rustic country lane amenity. He then dropped the bomb. "And I hear things, Jake. Her divorce was bad. She's leveraged up to her eyeballs on this development. If these house sales fall through because she can't deliver on the amenities, she's toast." That's when I knew I had her. It all clicked into place. The desperation, the aggression, the willingness to break the law and lie on television. It wasn't about convenience. It was about fraud. She was selling something that wasn't hers to sell, and her entire financial future was riding on her ability to steal it from me. She had sued me, slandered me, and harassed me. She had backed me into a corner. And now, thanks to a mailman and a glossy brochure, I finally saw the way out. It wasn't going to be a fence. It wasn't going to be a lawsuit. It was going to be something far more permanent. That evening, I spread everything out on the kitchen table. The vet bill, the invoice for the gate, the certified copies of the deeds and the survey, the pile of broken chains and locks, the news article on my laptop, the glossy brochure from Eddie. It was a mountain of evidence, a testament to her relentless campaign of harassment and fraud. Sarah came and stood behind me, her hands on my shoulders. She looked at the scattered papers, her gaze lingering on the brochure. She was silent for a long time. Then she said, "You're planning something. Something big, good." She squeezed my shoulders and went to bed, leaving me with my thoughts. I picked up the phone and called a number I knew by heart. A deep, gravelly voice answered on the second ring. Big Mike's Construction. "Mike," I said, "it's Jake Mercer. I've got a job for you, a big one, and I need it done fast." You know, there comes a point where you realize that being right isn't enough. You can have the law on your side, the deeds in your hand, and the truth in your heart, but if you're up against someone with no shame and a whole lot of desperation, you have to do more than just prove your point. You have to build it in steel and concrete. If you've ever been pushed to that point, where the only answer left is a permanent one, go ahead and hit that like button. It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to build the wall. Big Mike showed up the next morning, his diesel truck rumbling down the drive and making the windows in my house vibrate. Mike wasn't just a contractor. He was an artist whose medium was earth and concrete. He was a big man, built like the machinery he operated, with a face that looked like it had been carved from a block of granite, and a perpetual wad of chewing tobacco tucked in his cheek. He hated two things in this world: shoddy workmanship and entitled city folk who moved to the country and tried to change it. Karen Holloway was the living embodiment of his second most hated thing. He lumbered out of his truck, spat a stream of brown juice into the dirt, and looked at the gate. "Heard you've been having some trouble with the new neighbor, Jake." I nodded. "She's been cutting the chain every day, Mike. Sued me. Called the EPA on me. Lied about me on the news." Mike just grunted, his eyes scanning the fence line, the road, the lay of the land. "And Eddie the mailman tells me she's committing wire fraud, selling access to this road as a written amenity in her home sales contracts." Mike's eyes lit up with a special kind of fire. "Fraud, you say? Well, now it's interesting." We walked the line where the wall would go. I didn't want a fence. A fence can be cut. I wanted a monument to private property rights. "Mike, I want a wall," I said. "Right here." I drew a line in the dirt with the heel of my boot, stretching about 100 feet, completely sealing off the entrance of my road from the county blacktop. I want it 12 feet high. Steel reinforced concrete. I want the footing so deep you could park a tank on it and it wouldn't crack. I want it to be the last thing she sees when she thinks about my ranch. Mike listened, nodding slowly. He kicked at the dirt. 12 feet, poured concrete, figure 3-foot footings, half-inch rebar cage every 12 inches. That's a fortress, Jake. That's not a wall, that's a statement. "That's exactly what I want," I said. He chewed his tobacco for a moment, thinking, "It's going to be expensive. You're looking at 50, maybe 55 grand when all is said and done. Concrete ain't cheap, and neither is my time." I didn't even blink. I'd been saving for a new bull, a prize Angus I had my eye on, but some things were more important. "I've got it," I said. "Cash." A slow grin spread across Big Mike's face. "Cash. I like it now. The permit. She'll try to stop the work." This was the part I'd already figured out. "We're not filing for a residential fence permit, Mike. We're filing for an agricultural security barrier. It's for protecting livestock from road hazards and trespassers. It's a different classification. The HOA has zero jurisdiction over it. The county will approve it without a second thought, especially after the stunt she pulled with the stampede." Mike let out a low chuckle. "Agricultural security barrier. You're a crafty son of a gun, Jake Mercer. I love it. Even a tank ain't getting through this. He spat again. When do you want to start? I looked at the calendar on my phone. Karen had a big, grand opening weekend event planned for her development in 2 weeks. Banners were already up all over town. How about dawn, Friday, 2 weeks from today, I asked. Mike's grin widened. Perfect, he said. There's nothing I enjoy more than a little bit of weekend overtime, especially when it's for a good cause. The next 2 weeks were a strange sort of calm before the storm. I continued to replace the chain on the gate every time she cut it, saving the videos. I was letting her dig her own grave, one severed link at a time. I saw her showing houses to prospective buyers, waving her arm toward my road, no doubt spinning her lies about the rustic country lane. Let her, I thought. Let her sign those contracts. Let her cash those checks. Let her build her house of cards on my land. Meanwhile, Big Mike filed the permit. As I predicted, it was approved in 3 days with no questions asked. The rebar was ordered. The concrete was scheduled. The pieces were all moving into place. The Thursday night before the build, I took one last drive down to the gate. I looked at the chain, the lock, the sign she'd defaced. It was a symbol of the last 6 months of my life, a constant, frustrating battle against an unreasonable force. But I wasn't frustrated anymore. I was calm. I was ready. I knew that by this time tomorrow, everything would be different. The time for temporary measures was over. The concrete was coming. At 5 a.m. the next morning, the world was still dark and wrapped in a pre-dawn stillness. The only sound was the chirp of early crickets. Then a new sound broke the silence, a low rumble that grew steadily louder. It was the sound of diesel engines. Big Mike's convoy had arrived. First came his flatbed carrying a massive excavator, then a bulldozer, then his crew in their pickups, and right behind them, the first of 6 concrete trucks, its massive drum turning slowly. They lined up on the county road, their headlights cutting through the gloom, all pointed at the entrance to my driveway. It looked like an invasion force. I was waiting for them with a thermos of hot coffee. Big Mike hopped down from his cab, a wide grin on his face. "Showtime," he said, taking a cup. The crew got to work with an efficiency that was breathtaking to watch. The excavator's bucket bit into the earth, tearing out the old fence posts and my now obsolete gate as if they were toothpicks. Within an hour, a deep 100-foot-long trench was dug where the fence line used to be. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon when the first signs of life appeared at Willow Creek Estates. A light flicked on in Karen Halloway's house. I could just imagine her, sipping her imported coffee, getting ready for her big day. By 7 a.m., the crew was setting the rebar cages into the trench. It was a skeleton of steel, a promise of the strength to come. That's when she appeared. Her white BMW screeched to a halt on the shoulder of the road. She got out, dressed in a crisp white pantsuit, ready for her open house. Her face, when she saw the scene, was a glorious picture of confusion, which quickly morphed into outrage. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, marching toward the worksite. "You are blocking the community access road." Big Mike, who had been directing the excavator, turned and walked slowly to meet her. He was a good foot taller than her and outweighed her by at least 200 pounds. He stood there, arms crossed, a mountain of a man. "Ma'am, this is a permitted construction site on Mr. Mercer's private property. For your own safety, please stay back." "Permitted? By whom?" "I am the president of the HOA." "I did not permit this," she screeched, her voice rising in pitch. I walked over, holding a plastic-sleeved copy of the permit. "I did," I said, holding it out for her to see. "Agricultural security barrier, approved by the county. Nothing to do with your HOA." She glanced at the paper, her eyes wild. "You can't do this. I have an open house today. I have buyers coming." She pulled out her phone and started dialing furiously. "I'm calling the police. I'm calling my lawyer. I'm getting a stop work order." "Go ahead," I said calmly. "The police have already been notified about the permitted construction. And the county office that issues stop work orders? It's Friday. They closed 10 minutes ago. They won't open again until Monday morning." Her face went from red to a sort of pale purple. The first concrete truck began to back up, its chute ready to pour. The sound of the diesel engine and the rotating drum was deafening. "Pour it!" Big Mike yelled to the driver. The gray sludge began to flow, filling the trench and covering the steel skeleton. Karen screamed. It was a raw, primal sound of fury and impotence. She ran toward the trench, and one of Mike's guys had to physically step in her way to keep her from falling in. The police did show up. It was Deputy Miller. He took one look at the permit, at the construction site, and at Karen, who was now babbling hysterically about her rights. "Ma'am," he said with a tired sigh, "this is all legal and above board. It's his property. There's nothing I can do. You need to stay off the work site." He then turned to me and gave me a slow, almost imperceptible nod. All day, the work continued. Truck after truck arrived, pouring thousands of pounds of concrete. Karen stood there for hours, her white pantsuit now smudged with dirt, her hair a mess. She yelled at the workers, she took pictures, she made frantic phone calls. Prospective buyers for her open house would drive up, see the massive construction site, the police car, the screaming woman, and the giant concrete wall rising from the earth, and they would slow down, shake their heads, and drive away. Her grand opening was a spectacular disaster. By late afternoon, the wall was poured, the wooden forms held the wet concrete in place, a monolithic gray barrier where a simple gate had once stood, but Mike had left one section open, the main 16-foot entrance. In its place, he and his crew installed the new gate. This wasn't like the old one. This was a custom-built beast, fabricated from quarter-inch plate steel and reinforced with I-beams. The posts weren't just set in concrete, they were part of the continuous reinforced concrete wall. Mike grinned as he welded the final hinge. "She'd need an anti-tank missile to get through that," he said. We closed the gate. The new locking mechanism wasn't a chain. It was an internal, shielded bolt system that was operated with a special key. As Mike's crew started packing up, Karen, who had been sitting in her car for the last hour, seemed to finally snap. The last of her potential buyers, a couple in a Lexus, had just taken one look and sped off. She had lost. The day was a total failure. She started her BMW. The engine roared, and then with a screech of tires, she aimed it straight at the new gate. It happened in slow motion. The white SUV, her symbol of status and power, flying across the gravel. The horrified look on Big Mike's face, my own heart lurching into my throat. Then the impact. It wasn't a crash. It was a thud, a sickening, final, metallic crunch. The quarter-inch steel plate of the gate didn't even dent. It vibrated for a second, a low hum, but it held. The BMW, however, crumpled like a tin can. The hood buckled, the engine was driven back into the dashboard, and both airbags deployed with a violent poof. Silence. Then, the sound of the car's horn stuck on, blaring a single pathetic note into the evening air. Deputy Miller, who had been about to leave, threw his car in park and ran over. The door of the BMW was pushed open, and Karen stumbled out dazed, a trickle of blood from her nose where the airbag had hit her. She looked at her ruined car, then at the immovable gate, and she let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. I just stood there, next to my $50,000 wall, and I didn't feel a shred of pity. She had done this to herself. The week after the wall went up was eerily quiet. The construction forms were removed, revealing a sheer, uncompromising cliff of gray concrete. It was brutalist, functional, and utterly beautiful in its purpose. It stood 12 feet tall, a silent testament to the fact that my property line was not a suggestion. Karen Halloway's wrecked BMW was towed away, leaving behind a dark stain of oil and coolant on the gravel. A tombstone for her arrogance. There was no more traffic, no more angle grinders, no more harassment. Just peace. But I knew it wasn't over. A cornered animal is a dangerous one, and I had just taken away her last hope of delivering on her fraudulent promises. The final act had to be on my terms, in a place where the truth couldn't be ignored. I spent that week not on the ranch, but on the phone. My first call was to a lawyer. a sharp guy from the city who specialized in real estate fraud. I emailed him my entire folder, the 47 time-stamped videos of Karen cutting my locks, the certified deeds and surveys, the vet bill, the police reports from the false complaints, a copy of the Willow Creek Estates brochure, and a sworn affidavit from Eddie the mailman. My lawyer's response was swift and enthusiastic. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "this isn't just a slam dunk. This is the Harlem Globetrotters versus a team of toddlers. We're going to the district attorney," and my next calls were more delicate. Using the promotional materials and a bit of online sleuthing, I managed to identify 3 of the families who had bought houses from Karen, the ones who had driven away from her disastrous open house. I found their phone numbers and I called them. I introduced myself not as the monster from the news, but as the owner of Riverside Ranch. I calmly and politely explained the situation. I told them that the exclusive private ranch road access they had been guaranteed in their contracts had never existed and was, in fact, a private road through my ranch. I emailed them copies of my deed. 2 of them hung up on me, but one, a man named David, listened. He sounded tired and defeated. "She told us. She guaranteed it," he said. "We have kids. We bought here because she said it was a safe, private lane for them to get to the community pool without going on the county road." I told him I was sorry he'd been lied to, and I invited him to the upcoming town hall meeting the following Tuesday. I told him the DA's office might be interested in his story. He said he'd be there. The town hall meeting was a regular fixture, a place where citizens could air their grievances. I knew Karen would be there. It was her last desperate play. Having failed with lawsuits, harassment, and brute force, her only remaining weapon was public opinion. She would try to paint me as the villain, the concrete wall as an act of aggression against the community, and herself as the victim. I made sure the local news was tipped off. I told the same young reporter who had butchered my story that there would be a major development and a public statement regarding the Willow Creek controversy. The media, smelling blood in the water, promised they'd be there. Tuesday night, the town hall was packed. The air was thick with anticipation. I saw Karen near the front, flanked by a couple of her HOA cronies. She was wearing a neck brace, a theatrical touch that was both pathetic and infuriating. She was playing the part of the injured party for all it was worth. I saw David, the homebuyer I'd spoken to, sitting in the back with his wife. He looked nervous, clutching a folder of his own. I saw the Channel 8 camera crew setting up in the aisle. I found a spot along the back wall, leaning against it, content to wait. Several people spoke about potholes and zoning variances. Then the mayor called Karen Halloway's name. She walked slowly to the podium, milking the neck brace for all it was worth. She began her speech, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. She spoke of her vision for a vibrant, family-friendly community. She spoke of neighborly cooperation and shared values. Then her tone shifted. She pointed a shaking finger in my general direction. But that vision has been shattered by the selfish, aggressive actions of one man. A man who has erected a monstrous 12-foot wall of hate, blocking a vital access route for our children. She went on, claiming the wall was an eyesore and a danger, and that my violent and unpredictable behavior, which culminated in her horrific car accident, had terrified the residents. The crowd murmured. Some people were nodding along, buying her performance. When she finished, the mayor, a man I'd known for years, looked out at the crowd. "Mr. Mercer, I see you're here. Would you care to respond?" I pushed myself off the wall and walked calmly to the podium. I didn't have a neck brace. I just had a folder and the truth. "Evening, everyone," I said, my voice steady. "Ms. Halloway is a very good storyteller, but I prefer facts." I nodded to the town clerk, who switched on the overhead projector. The first image that filled the screen was the 1939 survey map. I used a laser pointer to trace my property lines. This is the Riverside Ranch, owned by my family since 1940. And this, I pointed to the road, is the private farm track. As you can see, it begins and ends entirely on my land. There's no easement, There has never been an easement. I clicked to the next slide, a picture of the Willow Creek Estates brochure. I zoomed in on the amenities list. This is the brochure Ms. Halloway has been using to sell her houses, and this is what it promises: exclusive private ranch road access. An amenity she has been selling in writing to her buyers. An amenity that has never been hers to sell. A new murmur went through the crowd, this one with a different tone. I saw David, the homeowner, nod to his wife. Karen's face had gone rigid. She calls my wall a wall of hate, I continued, my voice low and cold. I call it an agricultural security barrier, and here's the county-approved permit for it. I built it after Ms. Halloway's repeated acts of vandalism and trespass. I clicked again. A video played on the screen. It was one of the trail cam videos, crystal clear. The crowd watched in silence as Karen Halloway, in her yoga pants, took an angle grinder and cut through my chain. I played another and another 47 times. The sound of the grinder filled the silent room. And as for her horrific car accident, I said, clicking to the final video, this one from a new camera I'd installed on the wall itself. The room watched as her BMW revved and then intentionally, deliberately, rammed into my gate and destroyed itself. The crowd gasped. I'm not the one who's a danger to this community, I said, turning to look directly at Karen. The person who is a danger is the one committing fraud. Just then, David, the homeowner, stood up. She's right, he called out, his voice shaking but clear. She lied to us. It's in our contract. We have kids. She sold us a lie. He held up his sales contract for the news camera to see. The room erupted. Karen was speechless, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, her face the color of ash. And in that moment of chaos, the back doors of the hall opened. 2 uniformed police officers and a man in a suit, a detective from the DA's office, walked in. They moved past me, their eyes fixed on the podium. The cameras swung around to follow them. The detective approached the podium, where Karen was frozen in the spotlight. Karen Halloway, he said, his voice cutting through the noise, you're under arrest for multiple counts of felony fraud and destruction of property. The handcuffs clicked. The cameras flashed. A collective gasp went through the room. Karen didn't scream or fight. She just sort of deflated. The fake tan, the brittle hair, the expensive clothes, it all seemed to collapse in on itself, revealing the desperate, terrified fraud underneath. As they led her away, her face was blank with shock, and I just stood there leaning against the podium, and for the first time in a very long time, I smiled. A real, genuine smile. The war was over, and I had won. They say good fences make good neighbors. But sometimes you need a 12-foot concrete wall to make a felon. The aftermath was swift and total. Karen Halloway's house of cards didn't just fall. It was obliterated, with the testimony from me, David, and 2 other families who came forward. The district attorney had an open and shut case. She was facing multiple felony fraud charges, on top of the misdemeanor for destruction of property. Her high-powered lawyer, the one she was always threatening me with, dropped her as a client the moment the fraud charges became public. Faced with a mountain of undeniable evidence, the videos, the contracts, the deeds, she took a plea deal. She got 2 years in state prison and was ordered to pay restitution to the families she'd defrauded, and to me for the damages and costs I'd incurred. Of course, she didn't have a penny. The lawsuit against me was immediately dropped. The financial fallout for her was even more devastating. The news of her arrest and the fraudulent sales practices caused the remaining sales in Willow Creek Estates to collapse. The bank called in her loans. The entire development, leveraged to the hilt, went into foreclosure. The half-finished houses stood like skeletons for months, a monument to her greed. Eventually, another, more reputable developer bought the whole project for pennies on the dollar. The first thing they did was change the name and tear down the gaudy Willow Creek Estates sign. They put up a simple 6-foot wooden fence along their property line, leaving a respectful distance from my wall. I never heard a peep from them. My life returned to a quiet rhythm. The wall stood, silent and gray, a permanent fixture on the edge of my world. Sometimes, When I drove past it, I'd run my hand over the cool, rough concrete. It had cost me $52,000, the price of a prize-winning bull. But what I got in return was priceless. I got silence. I got security. I got the peace of mind knowing that my land, my legacy, was safe. The cattle grazed peacefully, no longer startled by speeding cars or blaring horns. Sweet Caroline's limp became less pronounced, a subtle reminder of the battle we'd fought and won. One evening, a few months after Karen had been sentenced, Sarah and I were sitting on the porch watching the sun set over the pasture. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple. The only sounds were the crickets starting their nightly chorus and the distant, contented lowing of the herd. Sarah leaned her head on my shoulder. "It's quiet," she said. "Yes," I replied, sipping my beer. "It is." We sat there in comfortable silence for a while. "Was it worth it, Jake?" she asked softly. "All that money, all that stress?" I thought about the sleepless nights, the anger, the frustration. I thought about the smug look on Karen's face and the terror in my animal's eyes. Then I thought about the satisfying thud of the concrete hitting the bottom of the trench and the click of the handcuffs in the town hall. "Every damn penny," I said, and I meant it. And that is how a $52,000 wall saved my ranch and sent a fraudster to jail. It wasn't just about a road. It was about respect. It was about standing your ground when someone tries to take what is yours, not with force, but with a sense of entitlement so profound they believe the world should bend to their will. My grandfather didn't bend, my father didn't bend, and I'll be damned if I was going to be the one to break. The wall is more than concrete and steel. It's a story, a lesson written on the land itself, a lesson that says, this far and no further. If you love seeing entitled nightmares get a dose of concrete justice, smash that like button. Subscribe for more stories from the ranch. Have you ever had a neighbor from hell? Tell me in the comments.